We have big news on the foreign policy front today as the United States suspends talks with Russia on the civil war in Syria. Just a complete breakdown, basically, in this process. They have accused Moscow of barbarism after new attacks on the city of Aleppo, images that we've been seeing for 5 years, essentially. Secretary of State John Kerry now slamming Russia's actions in Syria. Earlier this morning, he had this to say.
Russia has turned a blind eye to Assad's deplorable use of these weapons of war that he has chosen, chlorine gas, barrel bombs against his people. And together, the Syrian regime and Russia seem to have rejected diplomacy in furtherance of trying to pursue a military victory.
John Bolton, former U.S. ambassador to the UN, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and a Fox News contributor. Boy, this must come as quite, you just have to wonder what people in Aleppo think when they hear this, when they've been living under the threat of these chlorine bombs that have been dropping on their heads for 5 years, Ambassador.
Well, that's what the consequences are of this kind of civil war. But I think, honestly, the real news here is that it took the Obama administration 5 years to figure out what was going on. I don't mean to ignore the seriousness of the humanitarian tragedy in Syria, but that's been going on for 5 years, too. And the fundamental elements of the administration's policy have been, one, don't do anything that offends Iran, which is the Assad regime's strongest backer, for fear of interfering with the negotiations and then the implementation of the Iran nuclear deal. And number two, act like Russia would be content to have a negotiated solution that eases the Assad regime out of power. That was never going to happen. But those two elements have been the basis of American foreign policy ever since the Arab Spring began. And if you want to know why there's carnage in Aleppo and elsewhere in Syria, certainly due to the Assad regime, to Iran and Russia, but it's also due to a catastrophic failure of the American worldview as exemplified by the administration.
Absolutely. And it now becomes even more clear than it already was that when the president talked about the red line and chemical weapons, and you've got chlorine bombs being dropped on people, that it became very obvious to Assad and to Russia that once that red line was stepped over and the United States did nothing, there was nothing to worry about. Nobody was going to come to their aid, at least not from the United States.
Well, exactly, and it underlines another truth, is that Barack Obama lives in a world of words. Vladimir Putin, the Ayatollahs in Tehran, the Assad regime in Syria live in a world of power. Who's winning?
That's a great point. When you think about the Libya argument for going into Libya, which was that there was imminent genocide that was about to unfold, that it was going to be so horrific that we needed to go in there to stop it. And it's almost as if it is as if just a blind eye was turned to an actual situation that was unfolding along those lines in Syria for 5 years, and we just sort of pretend like it's not happening.
Yeah, you could call it hypocrisy, but I think that would be too charitable. I mean, the Foreign Affairs Committee of the British House of Commons has just issued a report on Libya that I think demonstrates pretty clearly that the fear that Gaddafi was going to carry out carnage in Benghazi was not true, that it was the same kind of hollow threat that his regime had used repeatedly, so that the justification for the so-called humanitarian intervention in Libya was flawed from the outset. I would have intervened to stop Gaddafi from committing terrorism, but leave that aside. The administration's policy is so schizophrenic, so internally contradictory, that it's no wonder nobody pays much attention to what America says or does these days.
The so-called imminent genocide was used as a justification to carry something out, but when one actually happens, it is apparently not enough on the radar to take action bigger than words, as you say. Ambassador, thank you very much. Always good to have you with us.